The gentlelady from Florida, Mrs. Cammack, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Chairman Benham for being here in front of the committee today. So many important topics that we want to make sure we cover, so I'm just going to jump right in. Chairman Benham, in your testimony to the Senate Ag Committee, you stated that there is, quote, a thin line that the CFTC and the SEC must navigate when determining which agency has jurisdictional authority over the digital asset space. Additionally, you clarified that 60% of the digital asset space marketplace falls under the jurisdictional authority of the CFTC, and that the CFTC is prepared to assume the role of the primary regulator for cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. So this is a very important issue to me as the millennial representing in Congress. This is something very important to my peer group and a very complicated issue. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on Congress doing legislatively to ensure that the CFTC has spot market jurisdiction of the digital asset marketplace and doesn't fall into the purview of an overreaching SEC.
Thanks, Congresswoman. You point out all the things that I've said in the past and echo what you said about the importance of a regulatory structure. Right now, there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. From a CFTC perspective, our authority is very limited to police those markets. And as I said earlier, it is limited to fraud and manipulation in the commodity space. And as you point out, I think I mentioned 60%, and that number has stayed relatively the same. I think the market capitalization of digital assets tends to swing day by day, but in terms of the value of two core digital assets, Bitcoin and Ether, that is roughly in the 55 to 60% range of the total digital asset market capitalization. And at least Bitcoin has been determined to be a commodity by a federal court. I think Ether has not, but when you look at the asset itself, it looks like and tends to be more of a commodity than a security. I use that phrase thin line because this is really a balancing act and something that we need, I think, collectively support and guidance from Congress on as to how are we going to regulate the space, how are we going to protect customers, how are we going to ensure market resiliency, how are we going to prevent financial stability risks if the market continues to grow and scale at the clip that it is. But ultimately, and to speak to your support of the technology, whatever outcome may exist in 10 or 20 or 30 years with this technology, I'm a firm believer that American financial markets, both equity markets, security markets, and derivatives markets, are the best, deepest, and strongest in the world because of our regulatory structure, because there are clear rules of the road and bad actors are held accountable. And I think that same logic can be applied to the digital asset space. I can't predict what's going to happen. I think as a regulator, we want to assume it's going to continue to grow, and I have to protect customers and those core items about resiliency and stability. But in terms of innovation and development and growth in marketplace, I do think a regulatory structure would be helpful in supporting the growth of the market in the years to come, regardless of what may come from it from a technology perspective.
Well, and I appreciate your feedback. And at some point, because I certainly cannot in a minute and 40 seconds dive into the decentralized nature of what could be. So I'm going to just pivot here, and hopefully we can have a time to sit down and discuss further on this, and I'll have my office reach out to yours. But I do want to jump to a market stability question. Given recent events in Ukraine, I come from a heavily ag district. Farmers, ranchers, other commercial entities obviously rely on futures markets to hedge risk. And the Russian invasion of Ukraine has resulted, as you know, in extreme market volatility and record trading volume on global markets. Obviously, we're seeing fertilizer reach somewhere in the ballpark of 700% on some certain ones, particularly potash. Now, I want to know, how is CFTC approaching this from a surveillance standpoint?
Congresswoman, we are on heightened alert. We're making sure that we're understanding and identifying risks in the marketplace. We're looking at the cash market and seeing what we're seeing from a transportation standpoint, from a supply chain standpoint, and ensuring those supply-demand dynamics in the cash space are being properly reflected in the future space. As I pointed out, our core responsibility is obviously on derivatives markets. We have fraud and manipulation in cash markets, but if we can ensure that markets are fair, operating orderly, they're transparent, and that they're free from fraud and manipulation, that means they're reflecting cash supply-demand dynamics, and that means your constituents and other producers can hedge those risks and eliminate some of those extreme up and downs and continue to do their business as intended.
Well, and I know my time is about to expire. One last question, Mr. Chairman, if you would allow me to submit for the record so I may get a written response, I would be very much appreciative.